My biggest mistake wasn't marrying Tom. My biggest mistake was believing his mother, Martha, was dying. That one lie didn't just break my heart, it demolished my marriage and stole my home. For 5 years, Tom and I had the perfect life. We had built it ourselves, brick by brick. Our house was a small craftsman, the kind with a deep porch and a big yard for our dog, Leo. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. It was our fortress, and more importantly, it was away from Martha. Martha was the definition of high maintenance. She was sharp, controlling, and an expert in making you feel small without ever raising her voice. She was constantly orbiting Tom, using guilt as her primary tool. I kept my distance. Our private home was my buffer zone. That buffer zone was destroyed on an ordinary Tuesday. I was at work when Tom called. He never called during the day unless it was urgent. I stepped into the hall, already bracing for bad news. "Sarah, it's Mom. You have to come home," he choked out. His voice was completely broken. I rushed home. I found Tom on the sofa clutching a piece of paper, shaking uncontrollably. The sight of him, my strong husband, reduced to tears, told me everything I needed to know. This was not one of Martha's usual dramas. "Pancreatic cancer," he whispered, finally looking up. "Stage 4, aggressive. They said 6 months, maybe 8. The words hit me like a physical punch. Stage 4, terminal. All the years of subtle resentment I'd held against Martha vanished instantly. She was a human being facing death. She was Tom's mother. The shock was immense, the grief immediate and overwhelming. Tom became a ghost. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He was consumed by panic and guilt over every minute spent away from her. He drove to her huge formal mansion every night, neglecting his job and our life. He had to be with her. Martha played her role flawlessly. She was frail, constantly tired, speaking in sad, soft whispers about needing her dear boy close. She never demanded. She just created a heartbreaking picture of her absolute helplessness. The inevitable suggestion came 3 weeks later. Tom arrived home after spending the night on her living room sofa because of a pain episode. He looked utterly defeated. "I can't leave her, Sarah." "She refuses a nurse, says she only wants family near the end," he confessed, pacing the room. "She suggested we move in, just for a few months. We could rent out our house, cover the mortgage, and then move back once this is over." The idea was horrifying. Give up our home and move into her suffocating world? It was my worst nightmare. But I looked at Tom, seeing the pure, desperate anguish in his eyes. He believed his mother was dying, and if I stopped him from being there, the guilt would ruin him forever. I couldn't do that to him. "We'll do it," I said, my voice flat. "But only temporarily. We rent the house out, Tom. We do not sell. It's our security. Our life is on pause. Nothing more." He was beside himself with gratitude, hugging me tightly. I felt like I was signing away my sanity, but I was doing it for love. The move was quick. We packed everything into boxes, our entire independent life, and stored it in Martha's enormous attic. We signed a standard 1-year lease agreement for our craftsman house and moved into Martha's cold, silent mansion. I kept repeating the timeline in my head. 6 months, 9 months, then we go home. But the moment we were fully moved in, the dynamic changed. Martha seemed to gain sudden selective strength. Her pain flares were less frequent, and her energy focused entirely on controlling Tom's schedule. He was a captive audience, and I was just the quiet, supportive wife who disappeared into the background. The first undeniable sign that this tragedy was a monstrous fake, appeared exactly 3 weeks after we moved in. I went to the back garage to look for Leo's dog food. The motion light clicked on, illuminating the space, and there it was, hidden in the darkest corner. A brand new 6-figure luxury SUV. It had temporary dealer plates and the smell of fresh leather. No dying woman facing imminent death and massive medical costs buys a car like that, and she certainly doesn't try to hide it. My heart began to pound a terrifying rhythm against my ribs. The car was a secret, and secrets, I instantly knew, were the first hint that the cancer diagnosis was the biggest, cruelest lie Martha had ever told. The sight of that luxurious, brand-new SUV in Martha's garage was a lightning bolt of pure, icy suspicion. It shattered the emotional haze of grief and fear I had been living in. I stood there, frozen, staring at the temporary plates and the absurd, gleaming extravagance of a car only a person planning a long, comfortable future would purchase. The next morning, I confronted Tom, gently. I didn't mention the words lie or cancer. I just mentioned the car. "Tom, I saw a new car in the back garage," I said, trying to sound casual as I poured my coffee. "It looks like a high-end Lexus." "Did your mom buy that recently?" Tom was scrolling through his phone, already mentally preparing for his day of caring for the frail Martha. He barely looked up. "Oh, that old thing?" "It's been sitting there for months, Sarah. It's a dust collector she hasn't driven in years." "No, Tom, it's not old," I insisted, my voice firmer than intended. "It has temporary plates and less than 50 miles on the odometer. It's brand new. Why would your mother, who is facing medical bills and a limited timeline, buy a car like that and hide it?" He finally put his phone down, irritation clouding his exhausted face. "Look, I don't know, Sarah. Maybe she bought it before the diagnosis and couldn't cancel the order. Maybe she was trying to cheer herself up. Does it honestly matter? She's dying. It feels incredibly cold to question her purchases right now. Can we just focus on helping her?" His immediate defense, using the shield of her supposed death, shut me down instantly. The guilt hit me again. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being callous, looking for reasons to resent her now that she had invaded our space. I let it go, but the metallic taste of suspicion lingered. But the oddities accumulated fast once I started looking. Martha's schedule was impossibly convenient for her own control. Her absolute worst pain days, the ones that required Tom to cancel work and sit by her side for hours, always coincided with days I had important meetings or a long shift. Yet, on the rare afternoon when Tom had to be out of the house for a sustained period, Martha showed miraculous recovery. One Wednesday, Tom had an all-day training session. I came home around 4 p.m. to grab my laptop, which I'd forgotten in the haste of our move. The house was quiet. I found Martha not in bed, not weak, but standing on the phone by the garden window. She was speaking in a hushed, sharp voice, completely upright and gesticulating with energy. She looked anything but terminal. I froze in the hallway. I could only catch fragments of her conversation, but they were chilling. "Yes, I told you. The final papers are ready. We need to push the closing date up, not back. I want the money in escrow by the 10th. Don't worry about those tenants. Their lease is just a formality. They'll be gone soon enough." The price was excellent. I managed to get far above asking because of the location. He has no idea. He thinks I'm his little martyr right now. Escrow, closing, tenants. My blood went cold. She wasn't talking about a piece of her own property. Her numerous investment properties were always handled by a corporate lawyer, not via secret phone calls. And the tenants, the couple renting our house. And the word martyr. I slipped away before she could see me, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The car was one thing, but this was a financial transaction involving tenants. The timeline suddenly felt critical. We had rented out our house for a year. Could she be selling it? Could she have somehow tricked Tom into signing papers? I went straight to Tom's office where his old work laptop sat. I knew this was a huge violation of his trust, but the fear of losing our home, our only true asset, overrode everything. I needed proof, and I needed it before the mysterious closing date. I bypassed his email and went straight to the public property records database. I typed in Martha's address first, clean. Then, with a sickening drop in my stomach, I typed in our address. The Craftsman, the porch swing, the yard where Leo still thought he lived. The result flashed on the screen, a punch to my gut. Status, pending sale. Change of ownership notice filed. The notice was dated less than a month ago, just days after we had completed the move and the renters had signed the lease. The property was listed as being purchased by a private holding company, a shell corporation designed to mask the real buyer. The details were clear. She had found a way to sell our home, and she was waiting for the escrow money to clear before the final closing. My hands were shaking, my breath ragged. She hadn't just faked a terminal illness to get closer to her son. She had done it to strip us of our home. The lease we signed, the boxes we packed, Tom's grief, it was all a distraction so she could execute a rapid, clean, and profitable sale of our house without us noticing. I needed the medical records. The truth about her illness was the only thing that could save Tom from this deep, terrible deception and save us from losing everything. I knew Martha kept important documents in a disguised fireproof safe in her study. The combination, I recalled with a jolt, was Tom's birthday. That night, I waited until Martha had taken her pain medication and was loudly, theatrically snoring in her room. Tom was asleep, utterly exhausted by his performance as the devoted son. I crept into the study, feeling like a thief in the night, though I was simply retrieving my own life. I found the fake dictionary safe, turned the dial to Tom's birthday, 11/14/1988, and heard the quiet, heavy click. Inside, among her will and insurance papers, was a manila folder marked Private Medical. I pulled out the papers, my hands slick with sweat. I flipped past the initial scans and consultation notes. My eyes finally landed on the official diagnosis and prognosis summary. It wasn't stage 4. The words swam before my eyes, but the meaning was terrifyingly clear. Martha had been diagnosed with an early, highly treatable form of pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor, PNET. The report explicitly stated, localized tumor. Excellent prognosis with surgical resection, fully curable, and then the final, damning paragraph, which proved her malicious intent beyond any doubt. The physician's note. It detailed her insistence that the prognosis be communicated to her family as terminal, 6 months to live, for personal reasons, a request the doctor had refused. It confirmed she had undergone the successful curative surgery before she called Tom with the bad news. She wasn't dying. She was cured. She was healthy. and she had used her successful recovery as the foundation for a malicious, months-long scam designed to steal our house and secure Tom's devotion. The sale of our home was real. The closing date was imminent, and the terminal illness was the cruelest, most manipulative lie imaginable. I stood in Martha's sterile, overly decorated study, the papers trembling in my hands, and felt a tidal wave of reality crash over me. The truth wasn't just that she was healthy. The truth was that she was a monster. She had successfully completed her surgery. She was cured, and she had used the word pancreatic to construct the cruelest, most perfect emotional cage imaginable. The house sale was real, the closing date was imminent, and the terminal illness was the lie that enabled it all. The initial shock gave way to a cold, focused fury. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just thought, I have to save Tom and I have to save our home. I was holding a nuclear warhead, but dropping it carelessly would destroy everything. If I walked into the bedroom and screamed, "Your mom is a liar," Tom would choose his mother's frail, tear-filled performance over my evidence, no matter how solid it was. My strategy had to be precise. I needed to attack the financial lie first, because that was tangible and undeniable, and then use the medical lie to crush her defense. I crept back to my temporary bedroom. Tom was still deep in an exhausted sleep, the sleep of a man carrying the weight of a dying mother. I looked at his face, haunted by grief, and felt a new wave of protective anger toward Martha. She had stolen his last months of peace, making him suffer for her profit. I waited until morning. I needed daylight, I needed coffee, and I needed my mind clear. At 8 a.m., I woke Tom gently. He looked terrible, shadows under his eyes. "Morning, honey. Did Mom have a quiet night?" "Quiet enough," he mumbled, rubbing his face. "I've got to run to the pharmacy for her new prescription. She said her pain is spiking today." "Wait, Tom. Don't go yet. We need to talk about something urgent," I said, my voice low and steady. I pulled out the documents. I didn't start with the medical report. I started with the financial death blow. I placed the property sale notice, the change of ownership pending, on his bedside table. "Tom, I need you to look at this," I instructed. I went online last night to check the property tax records just to confirm our address was still protected. This is what I found. He stared at the document, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is this? Pending sale? Our address? Sarah, this must be a glitch. We have tenants. We have a lease. This isn't possible." He grabbed his phone to call the county office, but I put a hand on his arm. "Wait, remember that conversation I overheard your mother having about escrow and the tenants being gone?" He hesitated, a tiny spark of doubt flickering in his eyes. "She was probably talking about one of her rentals, Sarah. Don't be paranoid. Tom, the buyer is an LLC. Look closely at the date. The filing date is 3 days after we moved in. Your mother forced us to rent out our house, move our entire life into her attic, and distract you with a tragedy, all so she could quietly list and sell our property without our knowledge." His reaction wasn't immediate rage at his mother. It was denial, predictable, gut-wrenching denial. "No, absolutely not. You don't understand her finances. Maybe she needed to liquidate an asset for her care. Maybe she's selling it to me, an early inheritance. She would never," he insisted, his voice rising, trying to find an angle, any angle that made his mother innocent. "She is dying, Sarah. Why would you accuse a dying woman of theft? That word dying was her shield. It was the absolute impenetrable defense. "This is exactly why, Tom," I said, my voice cutting through his denial. I pushed the second document, the oncologist's final report, across the table. "Read the diagnosis, Tom." "Read the prognosis, and then read the doctor's note at the bottom. Read every single word." He picked up the medical report, his hands still trembling, not from grief, but from a dawning horror. He scanned the top line, the one that confirmed the initial cancer, but then his eyes landed on the prognosis. Stage 1, pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor, PNET. Excellent prognosis with surgical resection, fully curable. He stopped breathing. He reread the paragraph, then the next. His eyes darted to the doctor's note at the end, the one detailing her malicious request. It took him a full minute, a minute of suffocating silence in which his entire reality dissolved. When he finally looked up, his face was unrecognizable. The color was gone. His eyes were wide, empty, and filled with the most profound betrayal I have ever witnessed. The surgery. She had it. She was cured. Before she even called me, he choked out, the realization tearing at his throat. He looked at the property notice, then the medical report, connecting the threads of the deception. The car, the pain episodes, the move, it all aligned into a monstrous, calculated timeline. "She faked her death," he whispered, the words a dying breath. "She faked dying just to get our house." His breakdown was immediate and terrible. He didn't scream or throw things. He simply collapsed back onto the bed, his body going completely limp, silent tears streaming down his temples and soaking the sheets. His lifelong devotion, his absolute trust in his mother, had been used as the blunt instrument of his own destruction. Just as I reached out to comfort him, the bedroom door flew open. Martha was standing there. She wasn't frail. She wasn't pale. She was fully dressed in a crisp silk dressing gown, her hair perfectly coiffed. The pain medication had worn off and she was alert, sharp, and furious. She had clearly heard the raised voices and the sickening whisper of, "She faked her death." Her eyes, cold and hard, focused instantly on the documents scattered on the bed. She didn't look at Tom, her grieving son. She looked at the papers that contained her carefully guarded secrets. "What are you doing, Sarah?" she hissed, her voice cutting like glass. The saintly, frail persona vanished completely, replaced by the cornered predator. "Get your hands off my private property. You have absolutely no right to touch my medical files." Tom, galvanized by the sound of her voice, struggled to sit up, his eyes locked on his mother. "It's all a lie, Mom." "The cancer? The stage 4. You were cured," he whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. Martha didn't blink. She didn't deny it. She stepped forward, her expensive slippers sinking into the carpet, and offered a defense more chilling than any confession. "Of course I'm cured, Tommy. What did you expect? Did you want your mother to actually die?" "I had to protect myself," she sneered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial level. "You two were never going to be able to afford the maintenance on that little house. It was holding you back. This way, I get the profit, you get a clean start, and you're here, where you belong. I did this for you. You should be thanking me, not that manipulative gold digger who tried to keep you away from your family." Martha's confession, that cold, calculated admission delivered with a sneer, didn't just expose the lie, it redefined her entire character. She wasn't a fragile, grieving mother. She was a self-serving tyrant who genuinely believed her crime was an act of selfless generosity. She looked at Tom, heartbroken and betrayed, and told him he should be thanking her. "I did this for you, Tommy," she repeated, gesturing dismissively toward the property notice on the bed. That little craftsman was a financial burden. It was dragging you down, forcing you into long commutes. Now, with the profit from the sale, you'll be free. You can finally breathe. She then turned her venom directly on me, her eyes narrowing. "But she," Martha spat, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me, "she wanted to keep you away. She isolated you in that tiny box. I simply brought my son back home, where he belongs, and secured his future." Tom didn't move. He was staring at her, his mother, the woman he had adored with a loyalty that defined him. His shock was so profound it was paralyzing. He couldn't reconcile the suffering martyr of the last 3 months with this icy, calculating predator standing before us. "You lied," Tom finally managed, his voice barely a rasp. "You faked cancer. You let me suffer. You let us both suffer, thinking you were dying. For a house? For money?" Martha gave a theatrical roll of her eyes, a gesture of exasperation at his childish naivete. "Oh, stop the drama, Tommy. I had a treatable condition. It's called being smart. I use the resources available to ensure my son's long-term comfort. Did you want me to tell you the truth and watch you drive away and forget me, clinging to that tacky little house with her?" The sheer selfishness of her reasoning finally broke Tom's paralysis. He scrambled off the bed, knocking the papers to the floor, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and agonizing disappointment. "You don't get it," he shouted, the sound echoing in the large room. "It wasn't about the money, Mom. That house was ours. We built that life, and you stole it. You stole my grief. You took the love I had for you and used it to rob me." "And you," I said, stepping forward, my own voice tight with controlled fury. "You forced me to move in here under the guise of an emergency. You invaded my life knowing you were perfectly healthy, just to make sure you had a captive audience while you processed the paperwork for the sale. The closing date is imminent, isn't it, Martha? You needed us here until the funds cleared," she sneered. "Smart girl. Yes, the funds from the buyer are due to be released from escrow next week, and honestly, I expected more gratitude. I secured an excellent profit, far more than you two would have ever negotiated on your own." "You embezzled the profits from our only asset," I yelled, the control finally snapping. Martha's composure faltered only slightly when she realized the full weight of the evidence we possessed. She glanced nervously at the medical report lying on the carpet. "You have no proof of anything, Sarah," she snapped, regaining her footing. "Those medical notes are my private records. They can't be used. And Tom, that house sale has been finalized with the title company. The documents were signed by me, using the power of attorney you granted me for my medical emergency preparations." A sickening chill went through me. Tom had, in the rush of his grief, signed a general power of attorney, believing it was purely for life support or emergency financial access. Martha had abused the deepest trust he had ever given her. "The money is already in motion, Tommy." "The deal is done," she finished, her voice radiating victory. "You can't undo it. Your house is gone." Tom looked at her, then at me, then at the scattered documents. He made his choice. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about choosing between the two women in the room. He turned his back on his mother. He walked over to me, grabbed my hand, and looked straight into my eyes. "We need a lawyer," Now, we need to freeze that money before it lands in her account. Freeze the funds? Don't be ridiculous, Martha scoffed, pulling out her phone. I'm calling my lawyer right now, Tom. If you try to interfere with my legitimate financial transactions, I will press charges for harassment and theft of private property. Your wife broke into my safe. The situation had turned instantly toxic and dangerous. We were trapped in her house, fighting over our stolen future. I knew running was the only option, but Tom, shell-shocked and focused on revenge, was rooted to the spot. We need to leave, Tom. Now, I urged, pulling his arm. The money is secondary. Get your phone, grab the documents, and let's go. It took a minute, but the survival instinct kicked in. We gathered the two crucial documents, the property sale notice and the medical prognosis, and bolted from the room. We didn't stop to pack. We raced down the opulent marble staircase, Martha screaming threats and accusations after us, her voice sounding strong and utterly healthy. We drove away from her mansion, leaving everything we had brought, our clothes, our furniture, our boxes of memories, in her attic. It was a humiliating, terrifying retreat. We had nothing but the clothes on our backs, my laptop, and 2 pieces of paper proving the most despicable betrayal. We drove straight to a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. We were silent for the first hour, the car filled with the crushing weight of what had just happened. When we finally stopped, Tom looked over at me, his eyes red and full of a hollow, painful clarity. She faked her death, he whispered again, trying to absorb the reality. She made me grieve her, Sarah. For nothing. She didn't just hurt you, Tom. She stole everything we worked for, I reminded him gently, pulling out my laptop. We need to call a lawyer immediately. That escrow fund is the only thing we have left to fight for. We need to stop that closing. The money is scheduled to clear in 3 days. The fight had just begun, but the stakes were impossibly high. We were homeless, broke, and facing a formidable, manipulative opponent who had already proven she would stop at nothing to win. And the clock was ticking toward the final, irretrievable sale of our home. We spent the next 72 hours in a cheap hotel room, fueled by bad coffee and pure adrenaline. We were in survival mode. The clock was ticking down to the moment that escrow account would clear, cementing Martha's theft and making the sale of our house irreversible. My laptop became our command center. Our first call was to a highly recommended real estate attorney. I laid out the facts quickly. The fraudulent terminal illness diagnosis, the abuse of the power of attorney, POA, signed under duress, and the imminent closing date. I sent him copies of the property notice and, crucially, the doctor's prognosis that proved the foundation of the POA was a lie. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Davies, was immediately on high alert. The medical report is key, she stated firmly. If we can prove the POA was obtained through fraud in the inducement, meaning Tom only signed it because he believed his mother was dying and needed emergency access, we have a shot at invalidating the entire sale and freezing the funds. Ms. Davies went straight to work, filing an emergency injunction to halt the release of the escrow funds, citing fraud and illegal transfer of title. The buyer, the shell company Martha used, was also notified, instantly throwing the entire closing process into chaos. Meanwhile, Tom was a shell of his former self. He spent hours staring blankly at the wall, struggling to process the depth of the betrayal. His entire world, his faith in his mother, his sense of duty, his home, had been systematically dismantled. He wasn't grieving a death anymore. He was grieving a life built on a lie. "I called her, Sarah," he confessed one evening, his voice heavy. "I called to tell her I was going to fight this. And she just laughed. She told me I was pathetic, running off with a gold digger who forced me to choose. She said I was throwing away my comfort for a temporary fling." "She is trying to manipulate you one last time," I said, rubbing his shoulder. "She knows she's losing control, so she's going back to the old playbook. Don't answer her calls. Focus on Ms. Davies." 3 days later, we were in the courtroom. It was a tense, agonizing preliminary hearing for the injunction. Martha arrived looking exactly like the elegant, wounded victim she always was, dressed immaculately, radiating sorrow. She was flanked by her corporate lawyer, a cold man who looked entirely too comfortable defending blatant fraud. Martha's lawyer argued that the POA was legally binding and that the medical records were irrelevant, as the POA was granted freely. He accused me of breaking and entering to steal private documents and tried to portray me as a greedy, jealous wife trying to sabotage a healthy financial transaction. Then Ms. Davies presented the oncologist's report. She detailed the diagnosis and read the doctor's addendum note, describing Martha's explicit request to mislead her family about her terminal status. "Your Honor," Ms. Davies concluded, "Mrs. Martha did not need power of attorney for medical or financial access due to imminent death. She was cured. She sought the POA under false pretenses to transfer the title of her son's property, while his judgment was impaired by extreme grief and terror. This was not merely financial maneuvering, it was fraud rooted in emotional blackmail." The judge looked directly at Martha, who held her perfect, sorrowful composure. The judge then looked at Tom, who looked utterly destroyed. The ruling came swiftly. The emergency injunction was granted. The escrow funds from the sale of our craftsmen were immediately frozen, pending a full civil investigation. The sale was temporarily voided. The judge noted that the evidence strongly suggested that the POA was obtained through a material misrepresentation of fact. It was a victory, but it was far from over. Martha, enraged, stormed out of the courtroom, firing a final hateful glance at Tom. The legal battle dragged on for months. Martha countersued, of course, accusing me of defamation and harassment. But with the frozen funds and the medical report as leverage, Ms. Davies managed to negotiate a devastating settlement. The terms were brutal for Martha. She had to officially sign the title of our craftsmen back into Tom and my names, paying all associated legal fees. She had to release the entire frozen escrow amount to us as compensation for the illegal transfer, emotional distress, and legal fees. Essentially, she paid for the inconvenience of trying to steal our house, and we got our house back with a substantial settlement amount. We finally got our house back 8 months later. The tenants had moved out, and the place was ours again. The first thing we did was take Leo for a long, quiet walk in the yard. It felt small, and suddenly more precious than any mansion. The legal fight was won, but the marriage was broken. Tom had been forced to witness the ultimate cruelty from his mother, and the trauma of that betrayal had scarred him deeply. He still loved the idea of his mother, the one who was supposed to be kind and selfless, and the reality of Martha had left a toxic residue. We used the settlement money not just to fix up the house, but to fund Tom's therapy and eventually my own. We truly tried to rebuild on the ashes of that deceit. We worked for another year, But the silent chasm Martha had created, the fundamental breach of trust in the world, was too wide. A year after the court settlement, Tom and I amicably separated. He needed space to redefine himself outside of Martha's gravitational pull, and I needed to feel safe again. I kept the house. It was legally mine, and symbolically it represented the life I had fought to save. I never spoke to Martha again. The last I heard, she was still living alone in her enormous, cold house, complaining bitterly to anyone who would listen about the ungrateful son and the wicked daughter-in-law who stole her money. She got her wish. She kept her house, but she lost her son forever. The terminal deception didn't cost her life, but it cost her everything that mattered.